Hello and welcome to Kinship Earth Connections. I'm your host, Lauren Archer, Executive Director of Kinship Earth. On behalf of our founders, Susan Davis Mora, Walter Mora, and Stephen Gomes, our advisory team, our donors, members, and extended community of kindred spirits, we want to thank you for joining us today. Before I introduce today's featured guests, I want to give you a brief overview of the KINS network phenomenon. For over 40 years, Susan Davis Mora has established over 40 KINS innovation networks of heart-centered Earth advocates who are working all over the world to raise consciousness, to transform our global economy and systems from fear and greed to generosity and love. KINS members have a few things in common. We recognize that we are part of one whole, interconnected living system, and our greatest passion is spontaneously collaborating on projects and initiatives that are collectively ushering in the regenerative renaissance. We're playing what Buckminster Fuller called the world game, with a goal of making humans net positive to nature. And we play using the strategy of generosity, and we only win when we all win. Kinship Earth is the next evolution of KINS innovation networks, where we are building upon the foundation that Susan has already established, and we're connecting individuals across her multiple networks to make rapid advances at this critical time. At each of our Kinship Earth Connections events, we introduce members of the KINS alumni community to share progress on their initiatives, help facilitate introductions and strategic alliances, and foster our growing community as one global network. Today, we're delighted to welcome Benjamin Bingham. Ben is the author of Making Money Matter: Impact Investing to Change the World, which is now available on our online store. And thanks to Ben's generosity, all proceeds benefit Kinship Earth. Benjamin is a social entrepreneur, investor, certified financial planner, and registered investment advisor. He founded Three Sisters Sustainable Management, LLC, which manages his portfolio called Scarab Funds. He was educated at Yale University and Emerson College in England, where he was certified in biodynamic agriculture. Benjamin is also a fellow of Economists for Peace and Security, a member of the Investor Circle and the Social Venture Network. He serves on the board of the Mariah Fenton Gladys Foundation and the CSR Hub. He co-founded a nonprofit community campus for young adults with learning differences and two technology startups, one in biohealth and the other a global workflow solution provider. Our next guest is Charles Burkam. After graduating with degrees in economics and law, Charles spent a decade as an advocate for equal justice within community legal services before serving one term as mayor in a small city in New Hampshire. Having met the threefold image of human being within the Waldorf education movement, he moved to England and spent 14 years in educational and financial administration, exploring social principles based on that fundamental human image. After returning to the US in 2000, he has served as an advisor to the Biodynamic Farming and Gardening Association, a trustee of a sustainable land trust. He campaigned for the labeling of GMOs, spent 5 years as the primary caregiver to his father, and then served as the director of a K-12 charter school before retiring, in quotes. Charles currently is on the boards of nonprofits in education and the arts. He is a founding board member of the provocatively named World Institute for Societal Renewal, with the acronym WISER, that is building towards its launch. Now, Rudolf Steiner said, "A healthy social life is found only when, in the mirror of each soul, the whole community finds its reflection, and when in the whole community, the virtue of each one is living. I want to acknowledge that Walter and Susan Davis Mora on their biodynamic farm in Finca Sagrada, which we are in the process of transitioning from private ownership to a land trust as part of the Seeds Regen Civics Alliance program, have also been actively applying the Rudolf Steiner principles. And so we want to hear at some point in the Q&A after the presentation, Walter may have some things to share about how they're actually applying these principles on the ground. And I also want to acknowledge that our one of our advisory board members, Hank Patton, is here. And Hank has a school, an institute, a learning environment outdoors, and his students are here, and they've been studying Waldorf education. So we look forward to a rich dialogue after the presentation. So thank you, Benjamin and Charles, for sharing your wisdom about Steiner's work so that we can expand our thinking about a healthy societal framework. So with that, I would like to turn the microphone over to Benjamin and Charles. Thank you. And let's all say thanks to Ben and Charles for being here. And let's see, Benjamin, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can I share my screen?
You should be able to.
Okay, good. So in a minute, I'll share my screen, but I just wanted to say a couple of things just to clarify. It's really interesting that you used that quote from Steiner. It's really the healthy social life is found when in the mirror of the human soul. And this is something that comes up a lot, and I just like to say it's not each human soul, because if each community was a mirror of each human soul, it would be very complicated. But it's really the mirror of the human soul as a whole. And if we all built our communities based on this image of the human soul, which is what the Threefold Social Order is. I just wanted to clarify that really clear, because it's amazing that translation has gotten all over the web and it's actually incorrect.
Well, thank you for clearing it up for us. Yeah.
Okay.
So my understanding is Benjamin is going to do a little presentation first, and then Charles will jump in.
Yeah, so I will speak just very briefly, just a summary. If these takeaways, just 3 slides here that if they come through to you in this whole talk, I'll be happy. We'll have a conversation. Charles is going to also show a couple of slides, and then we'll have a conversation. And then I'm going to share a poem with you that I wrote out of my whole just feeling for this time, what we need to do in order to really heal the times that we're in. But this slide is just to say that threefold is nothing really but a reflection of the human soul. It is, it's inherent in all human beings. We have our head, heart, and hands. And you can see, that our thinking is most related to our head and the nerves and senses. Our feeling is mostly related to our heart and lungs, the circulation system, and our feeling for things. And our hands related to our willing, our doing in the world, our metabolism, our limbs, all that has to do with that passion and getting things done. So that's kind of the basis for it. It's to build community out of what we are already, not trying to be different or, one-sided in any way. So that's the first thing. Hopefully this will proceed to the next slide. Yeah. So what's really cool and why I really wanted to talk to people in the KINS network is that I've been involved with Susan since a long time ago. We have a real history. It goes back to our parents who were friends, but we didn't really know each other till the day before 9/11, although we had talked on the phone in the 90s. So I just love the fact that that Susan built the ideas for, in a healthy way, building community and building initiatives on a threefoldness. I don't know if she was conscious or not of it, but I think it's just the way it is. So what is it? It's, in your head, the individual thinking is research, and that, the gathering of generous experts is so much to do with individuality. It's not to do with, um, equality so much. The middle one, good agreements, like equal time at the mic, is really where we're equal with each other, and we have these good agreements, and they're based on feeling for each other. And then manifesting a real world goal for the good of all. That's really the doing. And then the last slide is just to add to that. This is kind of just a real summary, which is what we're going to talk about. Um, we can heal society or in any group that we're in with using idealism in a more conscious way. So instead of having liberty as the calling card for the economy, which it seems to be right now, freedom is really all about individual development. And we need to really use that ideal to know that research and development and education and the arts and sciences should have nothing, they should have no strings attached to really do the best they can be. And so that's the ideal for the cultural realm: science, art, religion, education. And it's so funny because culture is not really thought about very much. We think about our own culture, how we like to do things, but in terms of thinking about structuring society, most people focus on government. And how can we change the government to make our world better? And I'm suggesting, and Steiner suggested, we should be much more focused on how we make our culture freer and really, um, evolve our culture through individual development. The second is equality, which is, you could relate to the realm of feeling, for common ground, is all about governance, and it should be the ideal whenever you're talking about agreements, whether that's in our government or in your family or whatever it is. How can you guide your community into a feeling that all are equal in certain areas? So everything to do with agreements, um, not to do with like becoming all the same, like dumbing down our school system to tests, but really equality in all the things that we need in common. We all need pure air, pure water, pure, soil. We need access to education, and we need infrastructure for transportation and things like that, all equally, but we don't need to have the same curriculums. We don't need to have the same teachers. So equality is the realm of commonality. And fraternity, I put mutuality because fraternity has a male, insinuation. Reciprocity, or philia, which is brotherly or sisterly love, is the ideal for everything economic. So those three ideals and where they work best in the most healthy way. I also went into quite a bit with Lauren on the discussion that we had together. So that's on the site. I believe you can go into more detail. But with that, I think, um, I just hope that those three slides were helpful, and we can go back to them in the questions and answers if you like. And after Charles and I speak, I just want to remind you, I will do a poem that kind of summarizes all of this. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Benjamin, for that overview.
Okay, so I will step up and follow on. I will share my screen and hope my PowerPoint works. So the reflection of the threefold nature of the human being that Ben talked about is, if we are going to have harmony in society, we have to perceive that all mixed together in every situation. We have all these three elements active, but we have to learn to identify them and apply the correct principles that Ben just outlined. So the three realms of activity is the economy and governance and culture. And while mostly in threefold terminology, the state is talked about in terms of rights, I think it's really important to emphasize that governance is about rights and responsibilities. One of the real problems in the current situation is that people know very much about what rights they think they should have, but they aren't very conscious of the responsibility that they have for others. And if we're going to have people working consciously with reflecting a concern for the whole, which is what we started with the verse, and we hope to elaborate on, there has to be a wholeness and interconnectedness of all three realms. They cannot be separated, but we can perceive them and sort them out and untangle them in our minds. But in life, they're going to stay tangled. It's not about separating the three into totally separate entities, which has been talked about for quite a while, I think in a confusing way. So let's look at two of these, the economy and governance. And we have a global economy. We're painfully aware of that fact with the Ukraine war going on and the pandemic, the disruptions of supply chains, lack of whatever it is on the shelves because of deliveries from all over the world, whether that's the whole goods or just parts. So we have a global economy. That's been talked about in economic circles and even in media, maybe for the last 30 years. It's fairly recent, 30 or 40 years. But Rudolf Steiner talked about this during World War I, that one of the primary problems was that the economy wasn't recognized as global, but that it was the economy and the nation states working together as competitors. And he pointed out that if there is competition between nation states of any kind, including economic, that unless there's some other resolution of conflict process in place that people will adhere to and follow, which is not the case, that it's inevitably going to devolve into war. So national economies competing would lead to another war. And he said that at the end of World War I. That proved to be true because we had World War II. And it's a fear of many people right now that the Ukraine war could escalate into another world war. Whether it does or not remains to be seen, but the dynamics pushing us towards war because of these nations competing is still very much true. It's true now as it was when Steiner first wrote about it, and it's true as it was before and after World War II, where nations saw each other as competitors. So his point was that the culture suffers and the economy suffers during war. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen the land and the people displaced. We see the factories destroyed, railways and bridges destroyed, infrastructure gone, and the fields themselves, which is an important source of agriculture products for the whole world, burned and pitted as war zones. So war not only hurts the economy, it destroys culture. So what was the alternative? That instead of having governance and economy, politics and economy all work together, you needed to separate out politics from economic decisions, and that the economy should be coordinated by associations whose work would be not to compete against each other, but to provide for the mutual benefit by the most efficient production and distribution and meeting of consumers' needs. So instead of competition, which has a destructive element, although it could be redeemed if we had other conflict resolution processes that people would adhere to, but we don't have that. So we need to have this coordination by associations, which would meet the needs of all. So those are all consumers, not just some. So We have a single worldwide group, the economy. We are one in the economy, coordinated by associations with efficient producers, the distributors and consumers. Those are the actors within the economy. And the principle that they work from, as Ben said, is one of mutuality or reciprocity or fraternity or brotherly or sisterly concern. So you have that as the primary principle, and it does not need to organize itself. It does not need anything from governance. As it is, and as it's shown here, this would work to meet the needs. What's the role of governance then? Well, governance is really internal. It is local or regional. It is within nations, and it has to do with the culture that's within that nation. So you can have many different types of governance around the world. You don't have to have those all the same, but you would want the same function, which is the governance is to balance the benefits and responsibilities between the group and the individual. And so you have agreements that spell out those rights and responsibilities. And the principle would be equality. We want everyone equally considered and equally treated, and have equity and fairness in judgments, and not sameness, because individuals are not the same. But the principle of organizing the rules within which people should operate or agree to operate is equality. So what does that leave for the cultural realm? The principle is freedom, as Ben said. Well, what happens when individuals are free? They free to develop themselves and free to express themselves, have their opinions and share their opinions, and have their disagreements, but they're not free to impose their opinions or their ideas on others, which is why we have in our Constitution the Bill of Rights and the freedom of speech. Also, free individuals can make free choices as consumers. And if they become more aware of that mutuality that we just described in the economy, they can make more conscious choices. So conscious consumerism is very important into the development of a healthier, wholesome society that not only meets the needs of others, but takes into account the earth, its sustainability, and the cultural impact of intermixing cultures. So the other aspect that we wanted to lead with here was that the economy is constantly growing and evolving, as is culture, as is governance. The rules change, the situation changes. So everything is constantly in change. But periodically, in order for new products or continuation of economic activity, there needs to be reinvestment into the economy. And now, and this is the realm where Benjamin works very strenuously, is we want that to be socially conscious, to invest in those things that do take into account the wholeness of life and the wholeness of the earth. So those have to be socially conscious in investment. So if at one hand you have socially conscious consumers making free choices of what are their true needs, and one of the questions as a consumer in terms of being conscious, is your choice based on desire and wants, or is it truly a need? And we have marketing and advertising that's trying to stimulate overconsumption, because our whole economy at the moment isn't based on balancing needs and production, so we have efficient productions. It's based on ongoing growth, and ongoing growth depends upon expanding continuously demand. Therefore, more and more wants or desires are termed to be needs. You need to have your vacation. You need to have your second home. You need to be able to have that nicer looking car every year. You need to get really, really deeply in debt to achieve all that, but no one talks about how you get out of debt. But conscious consumers would be more aware of all of those aspects. And between more conscious consumers and therefore more conscious, socially conscious investment, one could bring what is very far out of balance into balance, but it does require that everyone also understand that in addition to having rights, they have responsibilities. So I will stop my share with that.
Thank you, Charles. So I wanted to just take a breath for a moment. Can we just, everybody take a breath? That's so much information. And Lauren, how much time do we have?
Well, it is let's see, we've got an hour left total for the meeting. So we have time for you to read your poem, and then we definitely want to have some Q&A.
So maybe could Charles and I go back and forth a little bit for 10 minutes or so?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then you could just say when you think it's time for the poem. Just that's enough, you could say. Okay.
Okay. I'll do my best. All right, go ahead, gentlemen.
I mean, listening to you, Charlie, I tried to put myself in the minds and hearts of the listeners, and I may have completely failed. But I know for me that the question of a lot of people will, in sort of people that really care about the world, tend to uh, be thinking about how the government can change. I've said that before, and it's a very, so you made it very clear that well, you said at one point the economy doesn't really need to interact with the government. I think you probably need to clarify that a little bit more. You know, regulation is an issue that people talk about. And when I think about what we all need in common, it is a clean environment, a safe environment. And so there needs to be, laws around that would affect how one does business. In Europe, it's very regulated in terms of environmental stuff. So in terms of socially responsible investing, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, it's, the companies over there have to consider the environment. It's not even a choice. So that's something that is creeping into more and more government growth. So I just wondered if you wanted to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Um, the role of having healthy relationships often at every level, personal, family, organizational, is you need to have healthy boundaries. And otherwise, freedom becomes license. If you can do anything you want, including harming others, that's not going to work as a healthy social situation. And yet the relationship of the boundaries, I think, is there is a polarity between the boundaries on economic life and the boundaries relating to culture. And I'll try to make that clear very briefly. When I said that the government should not be interfering in economic life, it should not be trying to make the economic decisions, the decisions about the internal processes of economy, so that when it goes in there, it distorts economic life. However, it's totally appropriate that just like any other part of society, there have to be healthy boundaries where harm is not done. And for a lot of the time, the harm was unknown. People didn't realize, Romans didn't realize that lead pipes was going to lead to mental problems in their leaders and their elites because of the lead poisoning. We know that now because of the lead paint in housing projects damaged a number of children. So the boundary has to be around economic activity so that it doesn't go beyond a certain point. So in a way, the rights life has to create a boundary around economic life to keep it in check. Otherwise, because economics is related to the will and digestion, the economic life will digest the earth and have nothing left, just like the tail of it can be eaten by the dragon potentially, and there's nothing left. So it has to be contained. On the other,
That's good. I don't like the term consumers because in some ways, if we did keep consuming and consuming, we would destroy the environment entirely. But we're people
yeah,
more than we are consumers. And I also just wanted to point out that the free choice on the cultural side depends what choices there are to make. And I'll never forget when my wife came over to live in this country, she said every store she goes into has so many choices, but nothing I want.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that the choices, what Steiner says about who should run corporations, who should be the stewards of factories and farms and initiatives of all kinds, should be the best person who's most efficient, best, just like in the Kins method, you find the best, most generous people, and that's who should be running things. And there should be a way that we can find, this is something I'm trying to figure out with others. How can we make a movement that corporations and initiatives are run by people who really care about the world? And that would make a huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And those choices, in effect, are cultural choices. How do we recognize the worth and qualities in another individual as an individual and recognize? And for me, this goes very much with the loss of the concept in the indigenous world of elders, those who have out of their both their experience and their social wisdom are considered to be appropriate leaders. And for example, many indigenous nations had different leaders for wars. They had a peace leader and a war leader. They realized that social organization during war is a very different thing than during peace. It's a different state of being. And while it happened, it wasn't desirous, but they made sure that the qualities of the war leader was someone different than the peace leader. So the principle of leadership of the most qualified, if you apply it to the three realms, is different, because the leadership of those in the governance and rights realm trying to reach agreements should be leadership by those that show a talent and facility for helping people reach agreement, rather than those that are stimulating disagreement. So the quality you'd be looking for there is facilitation and with concern for the equal concern for the community. And likewise, really what's happening more unconsciously than consciously is that there's much more collaboration among organizations in the cultural realm. The civic organizations are building networks. Well, those networks can be linked to each other by both like-minded and like-acting individuals, but that's entirely voluntary. It's not coerced in any way. It's a free co-creation of the new world, and that comes from culture. So culture has to be supported for the fact that it is what provides the future. It always has. The new ideas that help innovation so that the economy can be evolving, and evolving is not always growing. Growth is not always better. And I think that's one thought to take away. More is not always better. And likewise, the processes for reaching agreement within governance are evolving. And again, the new ideas about how to do that come from cultural life. And you have things like nonviolent communication practices, and there are many, many others. The work that Ardha Sharma does with envisioning the future is a way of working towards agreement in a new way that's fully inclusive and does treat people equally, but lets the future speak. So these things are all naturally emerging because they are embedded within the human soul. But the more conscious we are, the more we can facilitate collaborative efforts in each realm, focused on each realm in a good way to make each one function at its highest and best principles for the good of all.
thank you. I agree. And yeah, there's so much to talk, but I don't want to talk at you if there's the questions aren't coming from you. So it might be good to go to the questions in a minute. I'm going to, is that okay, Lauren? Does that feel right to you?
It does. It feels great. Yes, because I know we've got such an amazing, well-educated group of kindred spirits in the audience here. And so it's so good to see everyone. So we would love to have some participation and then also invite Walter and Susan if they'd like to share a little bit about how they're using some of Steiner's principles on the farm. So yeah, do you want to do Q&A first or read your poem leading into
I
that?
like to read the poem, kind of, it might, because questions are coming up and maybe the poem will stimulate questions.
Okay.
Um, I also just want to say I'm so happy to see some young people on this call from the Waldorf group. Thank you for being here. It, you're the future, so it's really, really special to have you listening and you can become, share these ideas with others. So here's the poem. Uh, I'll try to bring it up so that you can follow it while I'm saying it. So just know that I wrote this poem in desperation. I needed to express what I was feeling and what I was hearing and where I felt we needed to be going. So when death, destruction, and chaos are spreading, when you're down and feel like all life might be ending, and I'm sorry, I'm changing the words a little bit because it's evolving. Find the seeds in your soul that's deepening to plant it in the soil of your life that's ripening. And when they say, actually, I'm going to skip that part to the next. So if you find the seed in your soul that's ripening, we'll find ourselves sustained ability by sowing seeds of new community in small solutions with integrity discovered by uncovering underappreciated resources that are waiting, not wasting, they're waiting in our unconsciousness from our habitual accommodation to dominant interests that throw gray shadows over us. And this is where I would say if they're to say go big or go home from their place of power, just say come home. This is not their hour. Now is the hour to form perfect unions, to collaborate in generosity and colorful diversity in a new communiversity of life. For in the many is one universe with infinite possibilities when we sow the seeds of new community, maximizing mutuality, seeking always reciprocity, finding sisters and brothers globally, will form a whole new world economy. And that's not the end, because note, I'm not talking about that one run by one with centralized control and monetized, digitized, and supposedly democratized with blockchain artificially intelligent servitude to singularity. No, an old, new one in three, the mirror of humanity, the head, the heart, the hands standing on the ground of body, soul, and spirit, the spirit freed in thinking, the soul recognizing the equal rights of all in feeling, the body meeting human needs in working. Yes, in the cultures of all nations, science, art, and religion now free from government, which will be small and focused on equality, business now serving society. This articulation needs to be in front of mind with clarity. All cultures free in their multiplicity, all governments governed by equality, all business taking responsibility. And this is not a decree to be decreed, it's a seed that sets us free, a reframing of society that can grow and grow organically. For each of us is on a journey. Nobody said it was going to be easy, but in seeking our missions and facing our karma, we're the heroes and heroines of the world's dramas. For in the many is one universe with infinite possibilities. When we sow the seeds of new community, maximizing mutuality, seeking always reciprocity, and finding sisters and brothers locally and globally, will form a whole new world economy. So that's where I wanted to leave you with. I'm going to just leave this slide up for a minute, and I really look forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Benjamin. That was amazing. In order to see the questions, I don't know, can everyone see each other with that screen share up? Or do we?
I can see everyone.
Can you see everyone? Okay, so there you should be able to switch to gallery view if you want to see everyone. So thank you, gentlemen, for opening the door to this rich topic. I'd love to open it up now for Q&A. Also, before I've noticed Walter and Susan may be having some internet issues. So before we lose you again, did you want to jump in and share anything about how you're using some of these principles on Finca Sagrada?
You're muted, Walter.
Now feel free to unmute.
Okay. Yes, I could say a few words because, but it'd be on a more practical level. For instance, when I was 21 years old, I joined the anthroposophical community, part of the Camp Hill community. And just in the economic realm, nobody was paid, but we were all looked after financially. And there was, for instance, there was a doctor there who taught, went and gave talks all around the world, but his needs were very little, so he hardly got any money. Whereas there was a family there with 4 kids in the Waldorf school, and they were supported financially. So that would be an example of the brotherhood. And for me, that was sort of neat because, I was supported financially to do what I love to do. I was farming then too. And here at Finca Sagrada, there's so many examples of how this threefold social order can be followed. And no, this isn't a perfect example or anything, but I think we do try to work out of those ideas. So in the economic realm, Susan and I have Social Security, and our needs aren't that great anymore. But we do have work partners who need money to send their daughter to college and stuff. So we're able to support them financially. Well, they get a wage in the normal way of being, but we also usually have 4 or 6 volunteers, and what they have is lots of energy and skill. Some of them don't have that many skills, but they have a lot of energy and they want to learn. So we were able to. They get free room and board, and they work 5 hours a day. So that would be sort of, an example of working in brotherhood in our own little way. And then, of course, in the spiritual sphere, although we farm biodynamically, our work partners, Jose and Carmen, are indigenous, and they practice within that realm. It's very compatible. They follow their indigenous ideas too, and like do ceremonies for the solstice. And as we develop our community in the future, we're expanding and looking for some more partners in the rights sphere. We're setting up SAS, which is a LLC. The voting power will be equal, not based on one's wealth or whatever. So that's how we've sort of tried to live those ideas.
That's awesome. Thank you for those practical examples. Yes. And so for those of you interested, there are opportunities to get involved in the development of Finca Sagrada as a community supported sacred site, where they're transferring from private ownership to trust. And so anyway, contact us if you would like more information on that. That's in Vilcabamba, Ecuador. So thank you so much, Walter and Susan. And Susan, thank you for being the attractor field that has drawn all of these people here today. Before we open it up for Q&A, is there anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, just my personal story, because when I was...
Oh, shoot. I was going to spotlight you and I accidentally muted you. Can you please, Walter, unmute?
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. When I was young, I loved nature and I loved horses, and that was what I wanted my life to be. But when I went through college and started learning about the world, I was horrified that humanity was taking advantage of nature and really killing lots of nature. And I just felt that I had to really do something about that because I cared about nature so much. And so I created a whole new industry called social investing, where I found investors that believed in agriculture and supported it. And we created money systems that restored nature. So that was the thrill of my life and why I was here. And I worked really hard and everything. And then I met Walter, and we've been married for 20 years now. And when he I had a friend, a psychic friend, tell me that I was going to die in a year. And I stopped doing everything to try and have another option than that. And sure enough, I helped somebody I'd never met very dramatically. And she gifted us with 2 weeks in Ecuador in her new house she built. And we fell in love with Ecuador immediately and with Vilcabamba. And we wound up staying. This was 15 years ago. My life has been saved. I didn't die. And miraculously, we were introduced to this incredible sacred farm. And Walter was supposed to be here, and I was supposed to be here with him. And for almost 15 years now, we've been developing it so that it can be a world-class center of how humans can live in the highest vibration, restoring nature and benefiting from nature and being a model. And so what Walter's doing now is preparing the farm for bringing in a number of key people that are leaders in restoring nature. And it's going to go on forever. And he and I don't know how we could possibly be happier. We've both done what we thought we should do to serve Earth. And then now we're just getting an incredible dessert of thanks from spirit and from nature. So that's why we're so happy and grinning all the time.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story. All right, so now it's time to hear from everyone in the room. So I put a note in the chat if you'd like to add a comment or ask a question. You can either do this and I can try to see you, or you can use the raise hand button under reactions. Okay, Pete, good to see you, my friend. Can you unmute yourself? Perfect.
Yeah, so this is really a coherent framework for societal organization. Just really appreciate this presentation. And I believe how we achieve this and become a truly human tribe rather than the polarized situation we have now is to recognize that each individual has something they can do to make the world a better place. This is where inclusiveness lies. This is where our common humanity lies. And this is where we can get everybody on board. It could be the smallest thing in the world, but if it's something that helps make the world a better place, it's personally fulfilling. It's generally where somebody's highest purpose is what they could do to make the world a better place. So all humans have the ability to reach their highest potential through this kind of understanding and different way of looking at how we treat each other. And so anyway, that's just it's kind of the mantra that I've been preaching. Most of you have heard this before, but I think it's really key for getting everybody on board for creating this new reality is understanding this part of our common humanity. So thank you so much for this presentation, and it's a path forward. So Bless you.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate that. Yeah, that sounds like it's in the cultural realm of each person being really participating and showing up. I love that framework now. I have a different way of thinking about it. Okay, Lucas, good to see you.
Great to see everyone. My connection's a bit unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, wonderful to see everyone and many friends. Good to see, of course, Walter and Susan and Pete and Ben Bingham's a very old friend who, amongst other things, was partly responsible for my parents' meeting. And for those who don't know, I became connected to Finca Sagrada last year and spent a number of months there. Also been working here in Colombia with the Kogi people, and also for a long time been working with Rudolf Steiner's ideas. I just thought, well, so thanks for this, the presentation from both of you. I just thought I'd, also good to see George here. I just thought I'd add a quick thought, since I've been working with the indigenous context and that's been mentioned. This could be a huge topic, but just a brief thought about how these two perspectives relate, that it's almost like the original indigenous ways of organizing society that are still represented in a place like with the Kogi society here in Colombia. It's almost as if the different areas of society, what we think of as the economic life, the political life, and the cultural life, are all sort of fused together and held within a sacred context that's guided by the sacred leaders, what we might think of as the shamans, who have a direct connection to a sort of a sacred source, to the Mother Earth. And we all kind of recognize the beautiful harmony that arises from that. But over the course of evolution, especially in the history, especially in the Western world, we've come to something very, very different. And where we're at now, it's like we're going through a process of understanding these different aspects of society and what their principles are and how they can be most healthy. And so where we are now, of course, it wouldn't work to just have some people tell everyone what to do, or have some religious leaders impose their view of things on society. That would be sort of theocracy, as we would call it. And so for me, what Steiner's kind of key insight is showing how, if we really understand the core principle of each sector of society and how it can best function, that actually can lead us towards a healthier society. And it's almost a paradox, but there's a deep truth into it, that whereas in indigenous society, everything is fused together, in modern society, we, in a sense, what we most need is to appropriately separate the different dynamics of society, so that our cultural life isn't overrun by economic interests, or that our government isn't overrun by economic interests, and vice versa. We don't want our government overrun by religious interests. So we actually, paradoxically, by keeping the sectors of society appropriately distinguished according to their own principles, and having, most importantly, this free cultural life that can connect us to our spiritual roots, I think that's how we can actually most come into harmony with something that's actually closer to the indigenous way.
Well articulated. Thank you. Yes, beautiful. And thank you for all the work that you've done. Lucas was the interpreter last summer at the Kogi gathering on Finca Sagrada, and he speaks multiple languages, so he was able to interpret between the Kogi, between the Quechua local indigenous folks, the Spanish, and the English. And so it was a very rich experience. So thank you for sharing your talents and your contributions.
Thank you.
Rowan, nice to meet you. Welcome to the community. I'd love to hear your question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. This is the second time I'm on the circle here with this community, and a few things This is a time of also selective but very special information foraging, given that time is short, but to be in specific circles or with specific people so that the right kind of messages can be accessed for the right kind of momentum. And I think the poem did that for me. So thank you very, very much, Benjamin, for the poem. I would love to access that, and I would love to kind of keep that as the background or the ground of being from which to engage from, and also to share it at the right time when there is the right receptivity for that kind of quality of subtle sharing. So that's the kind of first part. The other thing I just noticed also was that there was a word used that there's a big audience that is there, or audience. An audience to me felt a little kind of outdated as a word. It's more like a circle or a gathering. Audience are more kind of engaged in spectator sports or a kind of passive engagement, but we're all really engaging from our hearts and our minds and are engaging with our hands too. So more like a circular gathering. And so I had this question, which perhaps maybe Benjamin and Charles could provide some light on. And I live in the UK, and I live in a place which has been blessed with one of Rudolf Steiner's school here. And there's a big community of those people here. And I really appreciate the great man and what he's done. And there was a mention about, Charles, I think you spoke about being, the need to be conscious. So I wanted to ask a question to both of you, which was, is there any linkages or any guidance that he has provided, and I'm happy to search it myself, on the nature of the self itself or death? Because perhaps both kind of spark up the immediate awareness of the short term, but the whole privilege of being alive, and show the gift of sharing it.
Yes, the answer is yes. He wrote
Big yes.
about both the nature of the self and about death. I think that he was not a spiritualist. He wasn't into trying to have seances, which other people at that time were doing. But what he was doing was, in relation to the dead, was really trying to make conscious what happens when we die, and that there's a continuum. He was also, you could say, multicultural, in that he was very aware of other spiritual paths and other definitions of the self, but really was differentiating from Freud and some people today. And there's a wonderful source in the UK, Dr. James
Dyson.
I'll put it in the James Dyson, who just wrote a book, which could be helpful to you, who's been studying these things for many years. He's teaching an anthroposophical psychology course in the US, but remotely. So you're lucky to have him there. What he said in one of his courses, my wife is involved in that, was that if Steiner had, it's just sort of too bad that Freud was so popular and his idea of the ego became so generally accepted, that the idea of the ego being kind of the selfish, instinctive one that's, has different sexually related stages, is not the ego that Steiner was talking about. The ego is much more something that connects all of us. It's our true self. And in one of the books, I'll just say briefly, it's the gosh, I'm forgetting the exact title, but it's the world conception based. It's the theory of knowledge. That's what it is, based on Goethe's world conception. So he was very influenced by Goethe. He studied his scientific books, and on behalf of the German government organized all of his scientific writings. And Goethe had this wonderful idea in that book that I always think people need to hear. Is that humanity is a genus, not, that they're different. So it's a genus, and every individual is a species. And without every single individual, we wouldn't have humanity as a whole. And the ego has something to do with this humanity in everyone. It's a higher connection. And that's what we're kind of appealing to. We can feel it in our heart. But we also, so that's the warmth of love. We also need to develop the light of love, which is the connecting on a higher level. And that's something that he wrote a lot of. He gave 6,000 lectures, so you can believe,
Awesome.
There's
Thank you very much.
materials.
Yeah. I'd like to say one little thing quickly, and that you just mentioned the light, and it's the light of thinking, and his very first major published work of his own was the philosophy of spiritual activity, sometimes philosophy of freedom, but the process that's very related to Waldorf education is that thinking has to enter into your feeling, and then you actually can do something with it. If it stays in your thinking, you can get stuck there. But also, he said, in relation to understanding the world as it is, and especially economic life, you had to have incredible flexibility. He called it living thinking. And that's another thing to explore if you're trying to say, where does he give guidance to how you develop yourself towards the higher good? A lot of it has to do, and people have different paths towards it, but thinking is one of those.
Thank you. And there's just Benjamin would love to get access to that poem.
I put my email in the chat. Anybody who would like that, I'd be happy to send it to you.
And Benjamin, if you'd like to work together, I can help create that as a beautiful file, and we can post it too. So happy to support you on that.
I felt like it was a gift that came through me, and I worked really hard to get it as concise as I could, but as real.
And did you do the artwork?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, I see that Dr. Carmen is with us again, has her hand up. Thank you for joining us from Cuenca, Ecuador. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Suzanne and Walter.
Hi.
From Cuenca, Ecuador, and everybody here. A wonderful presentation, like always. That's why I never want to miss a Kingship Earth presentation. Because if you miss it, you miss it. You're missing gold. And so here again, that is the truth, to me anyway. And I want to thank Benjamin and Charles. So here we go. I want to go back to conscious consumerism and personal responsibility. And I want to address this first to Benjamin because I know he's a financial planner and he's got the Three Sisters, company, etc. And I want to ask you, Benjamin, about, and then Charles also, if you could both address this question. How do you, when you get to us, the people, how do we understand our role in this emerging new era, from the industrial society to the new planet that we want to create that works for all of us? How do we do that, with regard to, again, personal financial planning, right? And how do we manage our money? That starts with how do we consume our money? How do we invest our money? Okay, and how do we move people to a different level of consciousness? And starting with the financial planners out there, all of the certified financial planners on the planet, which because I'm one too, the number is big. And how do we get them to really get into this new consciousness so that we can move the planet where we want to move it?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a whole, probably a whole another hour. I do train financial planners. I've spoken at large wealth management meetings, etc., to try to help people think differently. I think in this conversation, I'll keep it on a pretty high level because I think that's good to, we have to kind of move to a higher level, and then we can realize what we're thinking on a more practical level, like Walter was talking. On a high level, very simple level, um, at the same time, if we use our imagination every time we buy anything, I like to think of that's cash management. What am I doing with my cash? And I like to think that it's related to the past. So if I'm purchasing something, I want to know where it came from, how it affected the environment, who made it, were they paid well, all of those things. And becoming a conscious consumer is just being more demanding. And it's really working. It's really changing. I mean, when I started organic farming, biodynamic farming in 1973, there was no place to get organic anything. And now it's, whatever it is, the quality is maybe questionable, but at least people are putting it out there because that's because people demanded it. The same thing is true in investing in general, that is that people are demanding it. The next generation is that's inheriting tons of money is demanding it. The employees are demanding that their company is more responsible. So this is all good. It's all related in a way to the past, though. It's how are things made when it actually comes to be purchased. And how I think about loans in the financial arena is that loans should be supporting current needs that make things more equal. So I like to lend money to ventures or initiatives that are going to make a difference in a big way to everybody as much as possible, as many people as possible. So, for example, we're invested in land rights with the woman who actually transformed the economy of Peru. She's now been working in Eastern Europe where the governments owned so many houses, and when the wall came down, they didn't really own them anymore, and nobody really knew who owned them. So we're creating systems for formalizing ownership and title, and people don't really realize this, but 70% of the citizens of the earth do not have formal title to their land. They don't have security in their land. So this is an area where I would lend money to figure out how to equalize that. So that's the present situation, trying to create infrastructure and also policy, et cetera, that makes things more equal. And in terms of investing for the future, that can be both philanthropy or equity investment, not, so it can be anything from the stock market, which I believe could become a barometer of human values over time if people spoke up and only invested in companies that were doing good and, did not invest in companies that were doing bad. This is happening to some extent, but the sin stocks are winning right now this year. Last year, the good stocks were winning, and it's a real battle that's going on. What do we value? Do we want to own companies that are supportive? And owning stock is not as irrelevant as people think. Possibly, it is one step removed from the actually making a difference with a private investment, but it's a valuation process. It's like a smart mob that's valuing companies, and we need to be much more active and hold back. Unfortunately, so many people got into the proxy voting thing. They wanted to own bad companies and change them. I'm not saying that's bad, but they don't need to do that with much of their money. in order to have a voice. I think they should put much more of their money into companies that are making a difference. And then, philanthropy and venture are very similar because you don't know what's going to happen. You want to invest in things that are going to make the world better. And so we always focus on innovation. So if you think of these three kinds of money related to time differently and also different qualities of thinking. So imagination about the past for cash, kind of inspiration of what would be good for everybody with lending, and then intuition or innovation. It's where the freedom comes in. You want to invest in companies that are innovative and that allow people to free rein to really develop the best ideas. That's where we would invest in equity, in private investors. So I hope that's helpful.
I love that. So I got number 2, inspiration, investments, that inspire you. Investments where you use your intuition, which is innovation. And which was the first one?
Oh, it was just when you make purchase, it's cash money. What do you
Okay.
do with your cash? You buy stuff,
Something.
and it's already produced, so you have to think backwards from there. How did it get to be what it is? What I'm in front of me in the store, I'm going to buy it. I have to think backwards. Who made it? Were they paid well? Were they slaves? Were they using materials that were, mined in a bad way or mined at all? We use the natural step philosophy, which we've modified a little bit, which was developed in Sweden, which is very simple. It's 4 steps. We start with the last step, which is it benefiting society? Sort of, we only research companies that we think are beneficial. The second step for us is we like to avoid any kind of extraction from under the Earth's crust, because that's where where all the damage is done, bringing things up into the biosphere. So instead of that, we like to invest in recycling and other ways of investing that don't involve, as much as possible, mining or extraction. This third one is to avoid the degradation of nature, and I've added to that, and in parallel, the exploitation of people, because they don't generally go together. Polluting of environment is almost always in the same places where there's exploitation. And then the last one is to avoid chemicals that don't occur in nature as much as possible. So we don't do any pharmaceuticals. We don't invest in anything that somebody came up with, research that was funded by people who had a conflict of interest and who were, where there's a lot of damage being done these days. So
I'm going to interject with a time check because we've only got about 12 minutes left. And I see that the team on the biodiversity reserve with Hank, our students, have a question. I'd love to give them a chance to speak. And I know that Charles has a poem he's got something to read. So Charles, you've got your hand up. Do you want to insert?
Yeah, I would, because I think this would be helpful before the young people questions, because my work has been much more not with people with money to even consider investment. So most recently I was both the executive director and taught economics and government to 12th graders in a Waldorf state-funded charter school in Arizona. And so when I was trying to address these questions of what do they do, they're just entering life. They're just they've got some money, they're about to earn some money, or they've already got a part-time job. And I think they're certainly all the things that Benjamin was talking about in terms of who you should invest in, the more that people understand where their products come from. And we actually had them do product biographies, like take a pen and see where it comes from. Take, simple things come from all over. The pencil comes from all over the world. the graphite comes from one place, the wood comes from someplace, the metal to hold the eraser comes from a different place, and the eraser comes from a different place. Nothing is simple in the world. So that get a sense of how interconnected we are and be aware of those environmental consequences. So I did a lot of consumer education about GMOs before there was the non-GMO label in industry. And actually I used that with those students to say, you can decide to buy food. Oh, we all have to buy food. You're not trying to decide which model of car you want. You have to buy food. So how are you environmentally conscious in making your food decisions? And is it coming locally? All of those things that go into accessible and accountable kind of production processes in agriculture. And then the third thing, in addition to your awareness of what the products came from and the kind of same questions Ben said in terms of what's the externalities that aren't accounted for, the pollution that comes from a product, who you're buying it from, Walmart, or are you buying it from a local farm stand, those sorts of questions. I also said right now, because the government and economy are so intertwined that without eliminating the need to try to affect the political life directly and have it make better rules, you actually, when you buy something, it's a type of voting with your money. You're voting for that company. You're voting for continuation of whatever went into making that product available, or you're voting more consciously for things that you believe in. And so you can treat spending money as a way of voting because the two are not yet untangled. So I just wanted to add that thought before we got to the young people's question.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from the folks out in on the Columbia River Gorge at the Little White Salmon Biodiversity Reserve. What's your question or comment?
Yeah, we were talking about, like, we've been working with Hank for a bit now, and we've been talking about
up a little bit?
looking into the future.
Pull it close to you and speak up. Right.
And we've been talking about, like, looking into the future with, you know, what you're buying and consuming, and how we can get people to want to help the future rather than feeling like an obligation to do so, and how we can cultivate that desire. Do you guys want to add anything? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on that, Benjamin or Charles? How to turn it more into a desire than an obligation?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question because, you know, I think we are moving in a direction where a lot of good people believe that we need to be more regulated and more forced by, you know, regulations and laws to do whatever it is. And the inspiration to do good is something that's in each of us. We just have lost touch with it. I think it's more a matter of uncovering it. What most people do is they're motivated by greed or fear. Even very, you know, normal traditional financial people talk about the greed and fear that drives the market. And that's not what should be motivating us. We just need to get in touch with what's truly human. And this is one of the big lies that I call it a lie that, you know, when people say it's only human to be greedy or selfish, I say that's just an instinct, you know, out of greed or fear. And animals have instincts too, and they take care of themselves that way. They have to. But we are human, and we can love, we can be conscious, we can make decisions that are free. So that's all I would say.
Fabulous.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and I would add, I know we're very short, but just that the other phrase that's a real killer in terms of community is, oh, don't take this personally, it's just business. business is personal. The impact affects the person. You can't just say it doesn't matter because it's harmful or hard. You may, you can, so that's another one of those common phrases that just gives people the wrong mindset. So to the general question that was presented, I think it's in your life, meet people with real interest and show real interest in them. Listen to their story, show your concern with them. And if you develop that connection between people, the more that connection is strengthened, the more that the feeling of we are equal is shared in the way you interact, the more that the instinctual embedded feelings of worth that Ben said, it rises up. And so I think it's in life just being as much yourself as you can while you're figuring out who yourself are, because you're at the beginning of the journey. But in meeting other people, be really interested and show your care for them. And that draws forth from others a feeling of concern and care for you. And the more that we build this network of socially positive feeling, which is what the Kinship Earth Network is about, is building this social fabric. That social fabric is what's going to support people. It's the security net, not the social net and the governmental set, but the social net's the security net for the future to catch people when things fall apart. It's going to be based on these positive relationships among people that show that they care about each other, they value each other equally.
I love it. And we are almost out of time. I do like to start and end meetings on time. I want to invite Charles, since you're already spotlighted, to share that reading that you have with us. And then we'll formally close out. And for those who have a few extra minutes and want to stay, we'll go back to one more question. I see the team on the Biodiversity Reserve has their hand up again. So, but please go ahead, Charles.
Okay, just bringing back to this theme of the indigenous, I would also, before I read, this is the message from the Hopi elders for the year 2000. And just like Steiner's words 100 years ago are relevant, their message from 20 some years ago is still totally relevant. But also I'd like to mention the book Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell, which talks about the indigenous values and compares them to the Anglo-European values, as she termed them. And if you actually look at those, and I've done this, you can put those into a threefold order. So even the message that she's giving about the traditional values are fully threefold. And that is a lot of the work that I'm trying to do through my the emerging nonprofit World Institute for Societal Renewal. We want to show how these things are connected and how things are already threefold, but people have to understand that and then find new ways to collaborate. So with that introduction, I would like to end with this message from the Hopi elders. There is a river now flowing very fast. It is so great and swift, and there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold onto the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are take nothing personally, least of ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we must do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we have been waiting for.
Woo! What a beautiful way to close out the session. This dialogue was so rich. I'm sure we could all keep going for a long time. Hank and the team there, is that a leftover hand up, or do you have one more thing that you'd like to speak into the circle before we close?
Hi.
I am deeply honored to be able to have these clear thinking young folks with us right now. I want to just share with Ben this critical function and how he is thinking about this, and we'll pick it up at a later time. How do you align self-interest with future generations? Self-interest, of course, is another word for greed, but it's excessive greed and destructive greed. But self-interest is perfectly healthy. It's lunchtime, we're hungry, we're going to have lunch, which, by the way, these kids have been planting here and harvesting here. So yeah, I think we could park that as a important question. We've been talking about how the future could partner with us by providing a market for the co-benefits of better decisions. And I think that's the toolbox that could empower Ben's vision of the stock market as actually an expression of our highest and best humanity.
Thank you. And Hank has some great thinking on that topic. His presentation to Kinship Earth Connections is on our videos page, so we encourage everybody to check that out. And then part of what we're doing here is creating a space for collaboration. And so the models that we're working with, as you feel yourself drawn, please feel free to connect with other people in our community, and we'll be continuing the conversation in weeks to come. So closing thoughts before we close out the meeting? Benjamin? No, you're just saying bye?
If I have a moment, I would just love to say to Hank the idea that I've had many discussions with Waldorf kids on this subject, and it's very fruitful to just on the blackboard put on one side greed and on the other side fear, and then under them try to think of all the things related to that. And then in the middle, put love. And just what you come to is the realization that greed, when it's potentized by love in a homeopathic way, is basically self-development. And fear is when it's potentized by love, becomes security for the people you love, for everything that you need to take the oxygen mask first before you give it to the one who's less capable. So that's what I've come to. It's a really rich discussion.
Beautiful.
Lauren, I'd just like to say, I think that also in a slightly different way, that self-interest needs to be complemented by self-awareness, and that loving oneself is a step in the process of becoming self-aware. But there's also community awareness, the awareness of wholeness, which is what is in the verse you started with, self-awareness is not harmful. I mean, self-interest is not harmful as long as it's married to self-awareness and community awareness. So then it's another threefold form of three kinds of awareness.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm really, it was wonderful to be with you, and I hope it was helpful in some way.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both for being with us. Thank you all for attending. There's so many esteemed guests in our midst that we didn't get a chance to hear from. So just want to extend our appreciation, and please be sure to check out kinshipearth.org for our upcoming schedule of events. And if you're not already on our email list, be sure to sign up so you get invitations. Okay, love, light, and flow, as George would say.
Bye, everybody.
All for being with us.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's Kinship Earth Connections event. We encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more and get involved, please visit us at kinshipearth.org.